We're ready. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Bible study. We're going to start with Exodus 22, which actually in my Torah, which is Etz Hayim, but in the Lutheran Bible, it starts with 22:1, but here it's 21:37. So do you have a 21:37?
Let's see, I have a 21:35.
Yes, that's what.
36, no 37.
Yeah, interesting. It's okay because it'll work just fine. And for those of you who read ahead of this, it wasn't easy reading, for sure.
No.
It's very detailed, dry, because we're not reading stories anymore. It's just laws. God focuses all his instructions on us in laws, and how we're supposed to act with one another. So today we're going to deal with about 11 kinds of case laws that deal with theft and damages. And these are laws that have public and social implications. So they're not just personal, like we talked about last week. So the laws of theft that start our Parsha fall into three different set of circumstances. And the first one is stealing property and then converting it for other uses. So you steal it and sell it or fence it or whatever. The second one is housebreaking, breaking into a home, burglary. And finally, stealing without the intent to convert the items into cash. This is mine and I'm keeping it, for myself. So let's look either 22:1 or 21:37. When a man steals an ox or a sheep and he slaughters it and sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox he stole and 4 sheep for the 1 sheep he stole. So this is stealing livestock, cattle rustling, right? Which was not at all uncommon in the ancient world. And it's actually not uncommon in our world either. But the ancient law that we read here makes it very clear. This is a deliberate theft. The stealer meant to steal it. And then he meant to sell what he stole, and he meant to profit for the crime. So this was very serious for the victim and his family, especially if it was his ox that was stolen, because oxen took a long time to train, and they were like farm equipment, like tractors, right? They were much bigger than sheep, and they had more uses, and they had more meat for the thief to sell. That's why the ratio is bigger for sheep, actually for oxen stealing than sheep stealing. So this law tries to make sure that this crime won't happen again. It's a deterrent. So the law states that the victim should be enriched. Can you see that? That means he should end up with more than he had before the theft. And the thief should be impoverished. He should lose more than he was stealing to gain. That does not happen in our system. So Torah teaches that the penalty should counteract the crime. So it's easy to see why the penalty for stealing an ox is greater than a sheep, because a sheep isn't a beast of burden. They don't work, but oxen do. So the rabbis say this is yet another reason for us to study the Old Testament, because Torah teaches that physical labor is precious to the one who created the world, God. So God recognizes your work and your oxen's work as valuable. So when an ox is stolen, penalty must compensate the owner for time lost due to the oxen's absence. So Torah teaches that work is considered as important as money, different. And sheep stealing, that wasn't shabby either, especially if the sheep stealer intended to butcher the sheep and profit by the sale of the meat. And just so you know, this is not a crime that has faded into antiquity. Stealing livestock has always been a serious crime, including here in the United States. Cattle rustling in the United States was a hanging offense.
And horse theft.
Yeah, and it's still, today, cattle rustling is still considered a very serious crime in 2025 in the United States. I just found this. State of Oklahoma, it's a 3rd-degree felony, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Texas, the penalty can be up to 30 years in prison. Everything's bigger in Texas. And right here in Florida, I found House Bill B 491. It makes stealing livestock grand theft, which is a 3rd-degree felony. Yeah, mandatory fine, mandatory $10,000 and up to 5 years in prison. And I learned all this by reading a new magazine called Beef Magazine, which is another reason to study the Old Testament, because I never would have found beef if it hadn't been for Moses, right? And we're going to come back to more animal control laws, but now let's move to laws that deal with tunneling thieves. The text says, if a thief is caught or seized or is beaten or becomes stuck while tunneling or breaking into a home, and if the thief dies, there will be no blood guiltness on his account. Now, isn't this weird? And this verse also infers a nighttime break. And how do I know that? Well, the next verse says, but if the sun has risen on him, there is blood guilt for him, and he shall surely make his restitution. And if he owns nothing, then he's going to be sold as a slave for the theft. So these laws really are as different as night and day.
So what does the blood guilt mean? Because when I read that, I
That's
thought
a revenge killing. So if he's killed while tunneling into your home, the family of the thief who's killed has no right to extract revenge
If it's
on the
at
person
night.
who killed.
If it's at night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
At daytime. Wow.
very different if the thief breaks in at night than if he breaks in while the sun shines. And to make it even more tricky, the law goes on to include differences for what he stole and how that penalty is different. So what if the thief steals livestock, oxen, sheep, and asses? These animals are then found alive in his possession. Then he has to pay the victim double the value of the animals he stole. So there's so much going on in just these 3 verses. So how is the crime described in verse 1? Tunneling. So who breaks into a house by tunneling? But don't think of tunneling under the house. Because when we look at the Hebrew, we see the verb described comes from the verb in Hebrew to dig or to tunnel. And that was the easiest way to break into a house. And when you look at an ancient house in Israel, they lived in mud houses, right? And they had earthen walls. So the thief would literally dig into the wall of the house with a shovel to make a space for him to pass through to enter the house. So this is clearly, and this is where we get the expression, breaking and entering. You literally broke the wall of the house and entered. So if that thief is killed in the act, the one who killed the thief, who's probably the landowner or the homeowner, is not punished, and the dead thief's family can't seek revenge. So no avenging his death. And why? Well, because it was an armed burglary. The thief has a shovel, which was a weapon. And that infers, along with entering the premises at night, that is a premeditated offense. So, thought of murderous intent was possible. Furthermore, because the crime is committed at night, it's worse. Because imagine how dark it was back then in the day.
No ambient light.
Yeah, we don't even realize how dark it is, and we don't even live in the city, here. But in the desert, everyone in the house is asleep, no lights, and everyone is sleeping in one room, so they really are defenseless. So this law gives the homeowner the right to defend himself and his family, as well as his property. Now, if the homeowner catches the thief in the act, the homeowner can do what he has to do without any legal penalties. At night, that is. He has the right to do what he thinks he has to do to stay safe. He can even kill the thief with no Welcome back. Did you win all the events?
Oh, no, because it wasn't a competition.
Oh, it
It was
wasn't.
a class.
Oh, now you're going to be unbeatable.
No, not true. Not even
Hello.
close. Hi.
It's so good to see you.
Thanks.
Well, we're talking about breaking and entering, literally. Okay, so if the thief breaks into the house at night, clearly the victim can't see the thief, right? He can't identify the danger because it's just too dark to see what you're up against. So that means no eyewitness, so that means no justice. Because if the thief gets away, there's no way to ID him. So God and Moses and the rabbis say a nocturnal intrusion carries with it homicidal intent, or at least an imminent threat. So the homeowner has the right to lawful self-defense. But, of course, this is Torah, and Torah always has a but. If the break-in occurs in broad daylight, then there's no presumption that the thief will kill you. So killing the thief then is declared to be unwarranted, and no use of deadly force by the homeowner is allowed. That's why God and Moses gives us the sunshine law, that's what they call it, in verse 2, which kind of reminds me of a joke. Ready?
Okay.
A jewel thief enters the house in the middle of the day, and he finds two people in the house, a man and a woman. So the thief ties up the woman, and he puts a knife to her throat, and he says to the man, "Tell me where you've hidden your money and your jewels, or else." And then the man starts crying so hard, he tells the thief, "I'll tell you everything. You can have anything you want. Take anything. Do whatever you want with me. But please, I beg you, untie that rope. Free her. Let her go." And the thief says, "Wow, you must really love your wife." And the sobbing man says, "Not really, but she'll be home any minute." So, like, get out of here. So these people were not very nice, right? Now, back to the law. Daytime versus nighttime break-ins. So it's daytime, different story. You can see the guy so you know who he is. And you can see your way out of the house. So you can flee from the thief to safety. And then you can ID him later, and he can be punished. So if the sun is shining and you kill him in the act of entering your home, that killing is on you because you didn't wait for justice. But if you let him flee, or if you let him get away, and then he's caught, the thief still has to restore and return what he took from you. And if he can, he has to be your temporary slave until he works it off. So Torah says, this should be clear as day, that the thief is just after your stuff, not your life. So you can stop the thief, but you can't kill him. And I think we have laws similar to that. You have to show that your life is in danger before. But if it's at night, that's different. then the thief's life is up for grabs, no matter what his intent might be. So why do you think that's the law? Well, because the homeowner couldn't know if the thief has just come to steal or if his entire family was in danger. So a homeowner has the right to protect his family at the expense of the thief's life. So that changes in the light of day. Then the homeowner doesn't have the right to kill to protect his property. And we all know that darkness increases fear. Get more nervous. Fear of what you can't see. And it increases the possibility of harm being done to the victims. And everybody knows that, including thieves. So if the sun is up when the crime goes down, the homeowner can't kill the creep that's breaking in. But this is rather extraordinary law for this time. So if you think about it, God and Moses actually give rights and protections even to thieves. Very different. But rabbis say, well, why shouldn't they? Aren't thieves made in the image of God? You bet they are. Simple, done deal. But you know Torah, right? It doesn't stop here. Torah provides for possibilities, endless possibilities. For example, if the thief is armed and tries to kill the homeowner, even if it's daytime, then the homeowner has a right to self-defense. But if the thief is harmless, you can't kill the dope, no matter what time of the day it is. So if he's carrying a weapon, but the thief does not get off scot-free, he has to pay for whatever he stole. Then the text says, even if there's nothing to him. Can you see where it says that in your text? What does that mean, even if there's nothing to the thief? Well, it means he's a bad thief and he has no money. Even if there's nothing, even if he has nothing. In that case, he has to pay with himself. He has to work off his debt and reimburse his victims. He has to make restitution. So this contingency was covered even before God and Moses gave this law to the Israelites at Sinai. It was covered in the ancient code, Hammurabi Code, which was actually much stricter than Torah code. The thief is executed if he can't pay in the ancient system. You don't have the money to pay me back, dead. Which was crazy.
Kind of cool, and not only that, you don't get anything back.
Exactly. That's why
Yeah.
loan sharks, beat the crap out of you before they killed you, so they get their money back. Fines were much heavier in the ancient world, and the Hammurabi laws made distinctions between social classes. Rich people got more protection than poor people. But Torah doesn't do that. A rich man or woman is worth just as much as a poor man or woman. And Torah never, ever imposed the death penalty for property violations. But Torah's not wishy-washy, for sure. These laws are here to protect us from each other. So let's look at the next laws. And by the way, we're in 22. So the text continues with some what-if laws. Now, it may not sound like it, but this next law about stealing animals is still dealing with breaking and entering someone's house. It says, how can you steal an animal from a house, right? Does that make any sense to you? Well, back in the day, animals actually lived in the house with the family. They were smelly families, but okay, that reminds me of another joke. I had so much fun with this. What is the smelliest kind of ox? A buttocks. Sorry, bad joke, but it cracks me up. And I'm going, wait, I could do more with this. So, to continue. What if the thief steals an animal and it is found in his hands alive? Then he's caught red-handed. And that's where that expression comes from. He hasn't had time to slaughter the animal and sell the meat. Well, what if that happens? Well, then the thief has to pay the victim double the value because he has to be punished. Torah never declares to the thief, you tried to steal the ox, you got caught, so there's no harm or no foul. No, you have to be punished. But the law makes sure that the thief suffers some positive personal loss, and the victim gains another animal for his pain and suffering. Because the sages say, the rabbis say, without punishment, there's no deterrent to crime. And we were talking about that last week, is it or isn't it? But please, please, please notice, in Torah, the punishment is monetary compensation for the loss. And as civilization evolved, and these ancient bloodthirsty laws evolved, people changed. We got civilized. Or did we? Now, I mentioned this last week too. 19th century England. And they didn't adjudicate by the Torah, by ancient laws, right? But the English had a modern judicial system. So they ruled by the book. And the Book of Statutes, used by the English government in these days, 19th century, was known as the Book of Blood by some people, because there were over 220 property-related crimes punishable by death.
Wow.
England,
Wow.
itty bitty, by hanging. Crimes like if you cut down a tree on somebody else's property, you got hanged. Or stealing a hanky from a nobleman, just picking it out of a rich guy's pocket, which sounds just like Oliver Twist,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And kids were trained to be pickpockets, and children often were executed for picking a hanky out of a pocket. No mercy for children. And if strong evidence of malice could be found in a child, the child was hanged. So what does that even mean, strong malice? If the kid was believed to be bad, he had to be executed, because it was decided by the British government that if a young child who has malice within him or her is allowed to live, it could have dangerous consequences for the public in the future. It's Western civilization. God help us.
Kids were never executed.
God is trying
Yeah.
to help
I don't
us.
think so, even though they could have malice.
All right, so let's look at these awful ancient laws now. Next, animal control law. It's another what if law. What if a man lets his livestock loose to graze in someone's field or orchard or vineyard? And we haven't talked about vineyards since Genesis, way back with Noah. Noah was a vintner. He was a winemaker. I don't know if anybody knew that, and he
After the flood.
before and after, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and got him into big trouble because he liked his product so much. Remember, he was
It was
caused big problems.
Mhm.
But now this law says, what if he sends the animal to graze in the field or orchard or vineyard of his neighbor? Then what? Well, then he has to pay restitution for the impairment of the field or vineyard, and he must pay it from the very best of his own. So if his animal knocks down all the apples, you have to give the victim your apples, or better grapes. This is just another form of stealing, and it's not tolerated. And this is not an accident. It's willful negligence on the part of the grazing animal's owner. He just let his big ox barge into someone else's property, eat his crops, destroy his vines, uproot the trees. That's not going to happen on God's watch. So this is a finable offense, and the offender has to pay with his best products. Now, in this case, God and Moses want to make sure that it's clear that the penalty or the punishment is greater than the crime. So once again, it should serve as a deterrent, which sounds so reasonable, I think. The offending ox owner was negligent, but not necessarily malicious, maybe just dumb, forgetful. Okay, so this reminds me of another joke that I found when I wrote this. What do you call an educated ox with no education? An oxymoron. Very amusing, I'm going to. Very amusing. All right, so let's look at the next law.
Those are as bad as the jokes I put in the messenger.
Yes, I was looking at, that's not funny. I was looking in those for animal jokes. All right, so let's look at the next law. See if you agree with God and Moses. It's about crop damage, but not by an ox. This is about fire. When a fire breaks out, when a fire is started and it spreads to thorn bushes so that the standing grain and the growing grain is consumed by fire, the one who started the fire is responsible for making restitution. Now, this is not an act of God. This is not like lightning hit it or something. Can't you just hear Moses? I'm writing this going, we didn't start the, it wasn't us. So the text infers that the fire was started by man. And it may have been very innocently started because ancient farmers used burning as a control to clear the fields. And I'm not sure if we still do that today in places. I know
why
they
they
do
do.
for
They have controlled burn.
You know why
Fire
they do?
control.
Because they burn off the sugarcane
oh, they do.
crop, and then they go back and then they harvest it after that because they burn it first.
So in the park behind our house, that big county park back there, they do it different areas, different times.
Oh, to clear
Controlled
out.
burn
Yeah,
to prevent a fire.
yeah, exactly. to prevent the
It's
fire.
interesting because Torah kind of mentions that if the fire spreads to thorn bushes, and as you read that text, you're wondering what exactly are the thorn bushes, because they could be fences that people just set up from branches and brambles to kind of like those hedgerow.
The animals in.
Keep the animals in, dividers between farmers' properties, or these are stacked and loaded, and they're dangerous actually because they make great kindling. But the law doesn't seem to assume that the guilty party intentionally or willfully set the fire to burn up his neighbor's property. It's negligence. It starts out controlled and then it becomes uncontrollable, wild. So sages say, the rabbis, everyone knows fires are dangerous, especially controlled fires. Clearing fields by setting them aflame is dangerous. So here's a law to keep the danger under control. But of course, when it gets windy, it's very difficult. So Torah teaches that all attempts to help people get along may fail. Stuff happens, right? These laws try to assure justice, assign guilt, punish appropriately, not savagely. Sounds very reasonable. God and Moses thought of everything. But now listen to this. Look at verses 9 to 10. Or not really, 7 to 9. These deal with the proper way to take care of someone else's property. So, what if a man gives money or goods to his neighbor to keep for him, for safekeeping? And then, what if that money or those goods are stolen? Well, if the thief's caught, he has to pay double as restitution. But if the thief is not caught, the owner of the house where the goods or money are kept or used to be kept before they were stolen, here's what has to happen. And listen carefully because I think this is tricky. The guy who was watching the goods, he shall approach the gods. So he has to go before a group and swear that he has not laid hands on his neighbor's possessions. So he will dispose before God, some translations say. He'll appear before judges to determine whether or not he has laid hands on his neighbor's stuff. He takes an oath. And we should notice here that the law infers the neighbor is keeping the stuff as a favor. He's just going to keep an eye on it. He's not being paid to guard it. So his job is not the stuff's safekeeping. And so he incurs no liability if the stuff is stolen. Makes sense. But is it? So let's look a little closer. So a man has to go away. He's going out of town. So he brings his valuables to his neighbor and he says, listen, I'll be back in 2 weeks. Please hold this for me. And he comes back and learns from his neighbor who was holding his stuff, oops, all my money was stolen. It's gone. Robber came in the middle of the night and stole it. But is the neighbor telling the truth? So you could see how this situation could very easily escalate from a discussion to an argument to a fight. So God and Moses devise a method to stop that from happening. And they get the elders in the community involved, also called judges. They're going to interrogate and investigate. And everyone knows if the thief is found, he'll be fined double. But if the thief is not found, the owner of that money is out of luck and out of his money and possessions too. Because the guy watching the stuff assumes no responsibility. We have homeowners insurance today for protection, but they didn't back then. So the law goes on to deal with breach of trust, misappropriation, and illegal possession of items. Now look at verse 8, and we're told that this law deals with misappropriation of an ox or a sheep or an ass. But it could also be a garment or any other loss about which you see with someone else and you say, wait a second,
That's mine.
that's mine, that belongs to me. Now in this case, both parties come before a judge, and the one the judge declares guilty shall reimburse the other one double the amount. So let's say you lost your shirt, which is actually where this comes from, literally. You know, it was on my line drying after I washed it, but now it's gone. And then you see your shirt walking by on your neighbor's back. So what do? Well, you're not supposed to settle it yourself, neighbor to neighbor, because you go to the judge about missing property, disputed property. The judge weighs the evidence, and the party declared guilty must pay the other one double. And apparently this was not an uncommon occurrence back in the day. You lose something and it ends up in your neighbor's front porch or something. Or maybe let's say you lost your ox. It must have wandered off, nowhere to be found. And then you go, no, wait, I see my ox. He's right there in my neighbor's yard. Well, that's the situation that verse 10 addresses. So once again, you're going out of town. You bring your ox over to your neighbor to watch for you, feed it, take care of it until you get back. And then your neighbor says, oh, tough break. While you were gone, your ox got hurt, or it got driven away, or it got killed. Well, no one was looking. So there's no eyewitnesses. So now what happens? Once again, both parties have to take an oath before God. So they make a solemn promise. I swear in the name of the law, Lord, it wasn't me. There's no way this is my fault. And the owner of the missing or maimed or dead ox has to accept the other's testimony. No restitution. Now, there's no proof that your neighbor sold or maimed or killed the ox. And if he swears to God he's innocent, then that's the end of it. And Torah says, just let it be. Even though you know deep down in your gut that it's totally your neighbor's fault. The guy is guilty. You have to let it go. And why do you have to do that? Because Torah teaches in this world, no one can expect perfect justice in every case. So God and Moses are willing and eager to teach. Some days you win and some days you lose. And you may not like it, but you are expected to live with it. Now, more animal laws that seem to contradict the laws that we just read. And these are laws about borrowing and more what if laws. So what if your neighbor borrows your ox and your ox is actually stolen? Well, your neighbor has to make restitution for the ox or not. What do you think? And what if the ox that you lend your neighbor is torn to pieces by wild animals? Well, then your neighbor has to pick up all the pieces of the dead, torn up ox and present them to you as evidence, sort of habeas corpus in a way, produce the body. You can't just tell the judge, that was an awful, his ox was all torn up and there's a leg here and a head over there. You have to provide the proof, the blood proof. And if the judge decides that the attack by wild animals was not made on a stolen ox, which really means that the ox was not being hidden by the borrower, it was just one of those things, awful, but stuff happens, well then no restitution. Because the body pieces show your neighbor didn't steal your ox to sell it, sell the meat. It was sort of an act of God. Animals attacked it. This is wild ancient Near East, and there were animals of prey out there. And gathering and presenting the body pieces shows the judge, your neighbor wasn't far from your ox when it was attacked. So he was close enough to keep an eye on it, because if he didn't get those body pieces, they would have been carried off, right? Before the predators could carry them off and consume them. And those predators were lions and panthers and hyenas and jackals and wolves, and they did devour their prey very quickly. We don't think about ancient Israel being stalked by lions and wolves. Now the next law seems reasonable. It's telling us, be careful what you borrow. Verse 13, what if a man borrows any animal from his neighbor and it's injured or dies when the owner is not with it? Well, then the borrower has to make restitution, because the borrower is responsible for watching the animal. So God tells Moses, if someone borrows something, the borrower is responsible for it. And that can be tricky. So it's no surprise, because here we get that phrase, neither a borrower or a lender be. But God didn't say that in the Torah. And I started to look up, I thought Ben Franklin said that, but it wasn't. You know who said that? I was very surprised. Polonius in Hamlet. Shakespeare said it. And Shakespeare had a Geneva Bible, and he knew his Geneva Bible. A lot of Bible in Shakespeare. People have to borrow stuff, and it can cause problems. And Torah recognizes that too, and it helps us to know what to do when there's trouble between borrowers and lenders. But we probably shouldn't take advice from Polonius. Do you remember Polonius in that, that play? He was Ophelia's father. But he did say something that I absolutely love. He said, old friends are the best friends, but new friends are good too. And just so you know, Polonius was known to be the proverbial old fool, like a windbag, and he doesn't know when to stop talking. And sometimes you think that whoever wrote this Torah had the same problem, right? Because their laws just keep going on and on. So now we're told, if the owner is with the animal and something bad happens, no restitution necessary. So that probably means if the owner of the ox rents the ox to someone, and then the ox suffers a misfortune, the owner is not entitled to compensation for the damages.
Only the rent.
Right, but the owner is entitled to the rental fee.
Yeah.
Right, so let's leave animal laws for a while. But we shouldn't be surprised that there are so darn many of them, because animals were absolutely essential for the survival of the community. So they had to be protected, and methods had to be set up so that if something went wrong, people didn't attack each other. So let's move to a different kind of problem. Still damages with restitution, still robbery, but in a different way. The next law deals with the robbery of one's chastity and reputation. But I think we should leave this one for a while because it does come in a bit later in Torah, and it is rather complicated. And you know, we're still dealing with laws about this today. So let's leave verses 15 and 16, which is the law of the seduced virgin. Because attorneys today will still say, I hate to put the kid on the stand. She was raped, but she's going to get raped again. It breaks your heart.
Raked over the coals.
Yeah, raked over the...
Yeah.
So you're either going to be intrigued or disgusted when we go over this, but this book of the covenant that we're reading, don't you miss all the stories, Adam and Eve stories and Noah stories, dysfunctional family stories, but we're getting back to them. But we're still in the mishpatim. Mishpatim means laws, boring laws and goring laws and tunneling thief laws. But we really do need to sit back and go through these laws, not just rush through them, because we need to see that these laws were so much more than just CYA laws. You know what I mean by that? Ways of getting through life to stay guilt-free. This text really is a guide to get us to help us get the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And please pay attention to how these laws are presented. This guy can't do this or that to that guy. So all these laws that we've been reading about are about how one person has to deal with one other person and how we have to protect ourselves from one particular person and how we have to protect that one particular person from us. So all these laws keep us from overdoing or underdoing the consequences for one person. So why do you think God wrote them this way? Well, Sarah Basson, I really like the way she wrote her midrash. She said it's all about compassion. God is teaching us about compassion. And we can be more compassionate when we're dealing with one person at a time. All these laws that we've been working in, if this man does this to this man, or if this neighbor says this to this neighbor, it's not groups of people. It's not the haves or the have-nots. Rabbi Basson says we can be more compassionate, one person at a time, because we have the capacity to hold compassion for one person, a single person, much easier than we can for a whole group of people. And notice these laws all infer we already know the person that's being addressed, so that one person has a face. It's your neighbor, or it's the neighbor or the person down the road where you lent your ox or something. So that person has a face and a story. Now that thief tunneling into your home may be misstepping, but the thief is still a person with a face and a story and a soul. And he may be complicated and infuriating, but he is one person. And one person can't be easily erased from your mind or from your soul. But a group of people, different story. Much easier to write off a group, but group mentality. All those people, that's where we find all those horrible isms, racism, anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and ageism. Have you heard ageism?
Yeah.
Oh,
Experienced
man. Alive and well, and it's living with us, right? So you hear people say, you people, just pick a number. You 50-somethings, you 70-somethings, you are costing us progress. This company, we can't recruit younger people because you old people are just too set in your ways. And it's interesting. We talk about that sometimes with our populations, right? And God knows that too. That's why God gives us one-on-one laws, because it's too easy to say our congregation is too old to do this, or if we continue with this awful group mentality, we can say, well, blacks are only good at doing such and such, or Jews take advantage of doing such and such. Easy to fill in the blanks about groups. But when we deal with people on a one-to-one basis, we deal face-to-face with people, and we can actually take in the face, and we can look someone in the face and see their eyes and their freckles or their wrinkles. But when we look at a group, we don't see the person, the individual, we just see the group. So we have to stay focused on the person. A person is a story. People are a statistic. And God and Moses put these rules in front of us, and they demand that we make a choice. We can see people as one person at a time, or we can see people as a whole group from whom we need to protect ourselves. And we know the right way to go, right? So we can see the Torah laws protect both the victim and the criminal. But God wants us to do even better than his chosen people were commanded to do at Sinai when God set these laws before them. These laws are not perfect, but God knows we're not perfect either. Still, God is like the Godfather, like Marlon Brando, right? He makes us an offer we can't refuse. That's how Rabbi Amy explains this text. God gives us a choice, a way. We are not now who we will be. Now think about that. We're not now who we will be. Even us older folks, we're growing and changing and learning and processing and discerning. And that's what we do here every Thursday. We read and we ponder and we learn. And we learn that even Israel, God's chosen people, even they weren't always Israel. But over time, with experience and practice, they were able to see the value of God's word. We, the people, accept God's law. We accept the way God wants us to live, so we consent to God. We opt in. And we need to do that every day, opt in. We need to, and Luther taught us this, we need to wash yesterday away and start again every day and affirm God's values and God's grace and see each person as the image of God. And that's a good way to travel through our Exodus. But we're not going to do this. What we talked about before you. Oh, thank you so much. A few of the participants said, please, please, please don't go through this if we can't come because I'm out of town, I'm this, I'm that. So we were thinking of putting this aside for a little bit and instead digging into the liturgy that we're doing each week, talking about what we couldn't talk about, what I couldn't talk about in the sermon. For example, this week we have a great story by Luke about 3 different conversions and an exorcism, and we also have John's version of the Lord's Prayer. You can't do those in 15 minutes. So I'd like to talk about all the Lord's prayers next Thursday. The one in Matthew, the one in Luke, and the one in John, and how today we don't pray any of those. You know, we have one that was written in the 4th century, you know, hundreds of years after Jesus. We know Jesus prayed, and we know he prayed aloud. We just don't have any. He didn't write his prayers. It would have been so much easier, but and we'll do those kind of things. And this is the time where you would bring, you know, I'm so confused. Why this? Why did you think the liturgy, for example, put this reading in this week, or this psalm, or why is it David? Everything's so David. So questions, and I'm encouraging everyone from home to do the same kind of thing. Questions that intrigue you. I wish I could ask. And please bring your jokes, clean jokes, yeah, because I love to use them. I still have some kids that I work with, and I bring them to Jacaranda Trays. I bring them to Village on the Isle. It's fun to do. But how does that sound to you? Like putting this so that we don't lose our participants.
Start again in fall.
Yeah.
I think that sounds okay to me.
Yeah, but I mean, we'll still meet, we'll still do the Word of God, we'll still be in the Bible. We'll just choose.
Well, I was also thinking that for you to put all this together for 1 or 2 people.
Oh, it is my pleasure. I live, but I don't want this just here for 2 or 3 people. I want everyone to have access to it, because these are very tricky. It's very hard to read this and say, oh, that's what God meant.
It's very different to read this just on your own than it is to have the explanation and the background that you give for these laws. It makes a whole different perception of what's being done. than
But
just
don't
reading
you
them.
find it astounding how smart God is? You know, I
Always.
mean,
No.
no, he did do some boner things, but I mean, mostly amazing how modern, and we've incorporated so many things in our judicial system. You know, we mentioned that before. The Liberty Bell is emblazoned with readings from the Torah in Philadelphia. Just we're trying so hard to live within an ethical judicial system.
Well, the forefathers of our country
Right.
tried to do that. I don't know if we're doing it now, but
I know.
but we tried to. I mean, that was the original plan, and it seemed to work for the couple hundred years.
Except for slavery. And I mean, just hanging people on a regular basis.
Well, and now instead of, I mean, this wouldn't have worked if it took 2.5 or 5 years for you to come to trial for whatever happened. And now, sometimes people are lucky if they see the judge in 10 years, so they've been sitting in jail.
Oh, sitting in bail
Yeah.
because they can't. Yeah, bail.
So, I mean, this works if the system is working on a timely basis, like ours is supposed to, but then it isn't. So
Yeah.
Well,
people,
it depends on where you are. Some places it's more timely than others.
Yeah, and some people just wait because they're minor infractions, and they're sitting, hoping that all those bail reform laws eased those people out of jail that were just sitting for months and even years.
But you have people who are in prison who are waiting years and years and years and years for their second
in court.
hearing to come
Yeah.
up, to having a chance to defend themselves, and they're waiting forever. you have people who are in jail for a long, long time,
And you know, it's so interesting because we are, as Americans, I think we're a combination. We give ourselves passes like crazy, but we're also very hard on ourselves. We think we're absolutely terrible, the worst in the world. Our health system is the worst in the world. And when you talk to other people, we just had a big discussion. I don't know if you're aware of it. We have a lot of Israelis who are in Sarasota County.
Oh,
And
for help?
yeah, we just had a conversation about what's going on in Israel, because we hear so much about how unpopular Netanyahu is and how he's compared to Trump, and he's restructuring the Supreme Court, and it's so complicated, but similar. It's a democracy. But one thing that was made clear, and there were plenty of liberal Jews in the discussion too, so it wasn't just, you know, that extreme right IDF side. The country of Israel is 100% behind Netanyahu when it comes to defending itself.
Yeah.
They can't imagine being led by anyone else, and that kind of surprised me. They don't want a Blinken, you know. They don't want somebody who will try to see. They want to exist, and they're terrified
Yes.
that.
Yeah, they're shaky,
Mhm.
they're very shaky.
Very shaky.
Now, do they want Netanyahu to shut up about can they ride the bus on Sabbath? You know, because he's got that cabinet. This is a theocracy in a sense that was built on the Torah.
Didn't they just change something though, that people who didn't work have to work now?
In Israel?
Yeah, something like that. They changed something.
Israel is very, very, well, you know, they're running out of money, their
Oh,
defense.
there you go, because
And
people are,
But they've been
industry.
at war for a really long time.
yeah.
Yeah, forever.
Well, but they've been at serious war since,
Yes,
you know, the
October
last 200
7th.
years, since October 6th or whatever, October 7th of that's been 2 years now, right? Yeah.
Yep, it's just, but here's something, and we will get out of the subject and we'll talk about something a little bit easier. A woman, a rabbi, and oh, thank you. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody because our major danger girl is here to shut us off. God bless. Shavua Tov. We'll see you next week.